The Galactic Concordat had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. They were a coalition of 5 elder races, ancient species who had mastered space travel when humanity was still living in caves. They controlled trade, they wrote the laws, and they decided which species would rise and which would fall. In their minds, they were not conquerors. They were caretakers. The galaxy belonged to them because they had earned it. Humanity had joined the galactic community 300 years ago. When human ships first left their home system, the elder races had watched with mild curiosity. These newcomers were clever. Yes, they learned fast. But they were also young, weak, and utterly dependent on Concordat goodwill for survival. The Chamber of Elders granted humanity provisional membership in the Concordat. This was a polite way of saying that humans could exist, but they would never matter. They paid heavy taxes for the right to trade. They followed rules they had no voice in making. Their colonies were restricted to the worst planets in the worst systems. When humans complained, the elder races smiled and reminded them to be grateful. Most species in this position would have accepted their fate. They would have bowed their heads and hoped that someday, in 1,000 years or two, they might earn better treatment. Humanity did something different. Humanity pretended. On the surface, human civilization looked exactly like the elder races expected. Human freighters hauled cargo along approved trade routes. Human diplomats attended Concordat meetings and said nothing important. Human colonies grew slowly on their permitted worlds, never expanding beyond their borders, never causing trouble. But in the spaces between stars, where no sensors watched and no patrols traveled, humanity was building something else entirely. They called them revenants, ghost ships. Vessels wrapped in cloaking technology that the elder races had declared impossible. The Concordat's greatest scientists had proven mathematically that true invisibility could not be achieved. Humanity had read their equations, found the errors, and solved the problem anyway. They simply never told anyone. The first revenant was completed 60 years after first contact. By the time a century had passed, humanity had hundreds of them. By 2 centuries, they had thousands. An entire hidden fleet, watching everything, recording everything, preparing for a day that might never come. Captain Yara Chen had commanded the revenant vessel Absolution for 11 years. She was 43 years old, born on a human colony world that the Concordat had classified as marginally habitable. She had grown up drinking recycled water and eating synthetic protein, while Concordat officials visited once a year to collect taxes and remind her people how lucky they were. She had joined the Revenant program at 22. She had been watching the galaxy ever since. The Absolution drifted in the empty space between 2 star systems, completely invisible to every sensor known to galactic science. Around Chen, her crew of 90 worked in near silence, monitoring data streams from across Concordat space. They watched trade shipments and military movements. They recorded private communications between elder race officials. They documented every crime the Concordat committed and thought no one could see. There were many crimes. Lieutenant Commander David Osei approached Chen's command chair with a data tablet. He was her second in command. A tall man, with gray at his temples and sadness in his eyes. 11 years of watching had given him that sadness. Another report from the Frontier Observer Network, he said quietly. The Rithians are moving mining equipment into the Keth system. The locals are protesting. Chen took the tablet and scrolled through the information. The Keth system was home to a pre-spaceflight species called the Moravi. They had just discovered radio technology. They had no idea that alien life existed, no idea that their planet had been surveyed and catalogued and marked for future integration. How long until extraction begins? Chen asked. 6 months. Maybe less. The Moravi won't understand what's happening until it's too late. Chen nodded slowly. This was an old story. She had watched it play out dozens of times. The Concordat would arrive with gifts and smiles. They would offer technology and medicine. They would sign treaties that the primitive species couldn't truly understand. And then, year by year, the exploitation would begin. Resources would flow outward. The local population would shrink. Within a few generations, another species would exist only in Concordat museums, remembered as a tragic example of cultural incompatibility. Add it to the archive, Chen said. Everything, every communication, every transport manifest, every lie. Osei hesitated. Captain, the archive already contains evidence of over 400 systematic exploitations. We have proof of 17 deliberate extinctions. We have recordings of chamber meetings where elder race officials laugh about species they've erased from existence. He paused. How much more do we need? It was the question every Revenant crew asked eventually. They had gathered enough evidence to condemn the Concordat 1,000 times over. They had watched horrors that would haunt them forever. And still, the order never came. Still, they remained ghosts. We need to be ready, Chen said. When the day comes, there can be no doubt. No one in the galaxy will be able to claim ignorance. No one will be able to say the Concordat deserved a second chance. She met Osei's eyes. We are not building a case for war, David. We are building a record for history. So that when our children ask why humanity did what it did, we can show them exactly what we were fighting against. Osei nodded slowly. He understood. They all understood. Humanity was not preparing for a battle. Humanity was preparing for a reckoning. Somewhere in the dark, in hidden shipyards orbiting stars that the Concordat had never bothered to survey, more revenants were being built. Somewhere, human scientists were developing weapons that the elder races could not imagine. Somewhere, human strategists were planning operations that would unfold across 1,000 systems simultaneously. The Concordat saw humanity as children playing at civilization. They saw human patience as weakness, human silence as acceptance. They had no idea that they were being watched. They had no idea that every cruelty was being recorded. They had no idea that humanity was simply waiting for the right moment. For the Tarm. That moment was coming soon. The Vethkai were an insectoid species living on a warm, wet world at the edge of Concordat space. They had discovered fire 3,000 years ago. They had built their first cities 500 years ago. They had simple tools, simple lives, and no knowledge that the stars above them were full of ancient empires. They also had no knowledge that their planet contained the largest deposit of crystalline iridium ever discovered in the galaxy. Crystalline iridium was the key to faster-than-light travel. Every ship in the galaxy needed it. The Concordat controlled all known sources. And they used that control to keep other species dependent and obedient. The discovery of a new source, especially one this large, would change everything. The Chamber of Elders met in their great hall on the Concordat capital world. The 5 elder race representatives sat in their ancient seats, surrounded by symbols of their 12,000-year reign. They discussed the Vethkai situation with the calm efficiency of beings who had done this many times before. The natives are primitive, said Councillor Thesson of the Rithians. He was tall and thin, with gray skin and eyes that had never shown mercy. They have no concept of property rights, as we understand them. Integration will be simple. And if they resist? Asked another counselor. Thesson made a gesture that passed for a smile among his people. They are insects living in mud huts. What resistance could they possibly offer? The vote was unanimous. The chamber authorized accelerated integration of the Vethkai homeworld. Everyone in the room knew what those words really meant. The Vethkai would be offered treaties they could not read. They would be given technology they could not understand. And when they inevitably failed to meet impossible obligations, the Concordat would have legal justification to take their world by force. If the Vethkai still refused to cooperate, there were other options. The Concordat had used them before. Entire species had vanished from the galaxy, recorded in history as victims of disease or natural disaster, or their own primitive violence. No one would miss the Vethkai. No one would even notice they were gone. 3 weeks later, the Concordate's purification fleet entered the Vethkai system. 47 capital ships, each one capable of burning a continent to ash. Grand Admiral Thesson commanded the fleet personally. He wanted to oversee this operation himself. The crystalline iridium would make him wealthy beyond imagination. More importantly, it would make him powerful. The Absolution watched from the darkness. Captain Yara Chen stood at the center of her bridge, surrounded by holographic displays showing the Concordate fleet's formation. Her crew worked in tense silence. They had witnessed Concordat operations before, but never one this large. Never one with a purification fleet. They're not even pretending, Lieutenant Commander Osei said quietly. 47 warships to integrate a species that hasn't invented the wheel. Chen said nothing. She was watching the Vethkai planet turning slowly below the Concordat formation. From orbit, she could see their cities as clusters of light on the night side. Millions of beings going about their lives, raising their young, dreaming their dreams. They had no idea what was coming. The Concordat fleet began broadcasting messages in the Vethkai language. Scholars had been working for months to translate enough for basic communication. The messages spoke of friendship and cooperation. They promised wonderful gifts from the stars. The Vethkai responded with confusion and fear. Some of their leaders tried to communicate back. Others told their people to hide. A few claimed the lights in the sky were gods, or demons, or both. It did not matter what they believed. The Concordat had already decided their fate. On the third day, Grand Admiral Thesson grew impatient. The Vethkai were not cooperating quickly enough. Their primitive governments could not agree on how to respond to the alien visitors. Some wanted to welcome them. Some wanted to fight. Most simply did not understand what was happening. Thesson sent a final message. The Vethkai had one day to surrender their planet and accept Concordat authority. If they refused, there would be consequences. The Vethkai did not surrender. They could not. They had no unified government capable of making such a decision. Their world was divided into hundreds of small nations and tribes and city-states. Even if they had wanted to submit, they had no way to do so. Thesson had expected this. He had hoped for it. Begin orbital bombardment, he ordered. Start with the largest population centers. Make an example. The first missiles fell on a Vethkai city of 2 million inhabitants. The explosions were visible from space. Chen watched as fire bloomed across the planet's surface, spreading outward in rings of destruction. The city was gone in seconds. 2 million lives ended between one heartbeat and the next. The Vethkai transmissions changed. Confusion became terror. Pleas for mercy filled every frequency. They did not understand why the sky was falling. They did not understand what they had done wrong. The bombardment continued. Another city burned. Then another. Chen's hands were shaking. She had watched the Concordat commit many crimes over 11 years. She had recorded atrocities and filed reports, and waited for orders that never came. But this was different. This was extermination happening in real time. Right in front of her eyes. She opened a secure channel to Revenant Command. Admiral Okonkwo's face appeared on her screen. He was an old man now. One of the founders of the Revenant program. He had spent 40 years building humanity's hidden strength, always believing the day would come when it would be needed. Admiral, Chen said, her voice barely steady. The Concordat is burning the Vethkai. Millions are already dead. If we do nothing, there won't be anyone left to save. Okonkwo was silent for a long moment. Behind him, Chen could see other officers watching, waiting. The same scene was playing out on Revenant bridges across the galaxy. Every hidden ship was watching the Vethkai die. Our orders are to observe, Okonkwo said slowly. We are not ready for open war. The calculus is wrong, Chen interrupted. It has always been wrong. We have been ready for 50 years. We have been hiding because we were afraid of what revealing ourselves would mean. But if we stay hidden now, if we watch this and do nothing, then we have already lost. We will have become exactly what we hate. Okonkwo closed his eyes. When he opened them again, Chen saw something she had never seen before in the old admiral's face. Relief. All revenant vessels, he said, his voice carrying across every hidden ship in the galaxy. You are weapons-free. God forgive us for waiting so long. Chen turned to her crew. They were already at battle stations, already preparing for what came next. Drop cloak, she ordered. All hands, prepare for combat. The absolution became visible for the first time in 11 years. And it was not alone. Grand Admiral Thesson was pleased with the operation's progress. 3 major Vethkai cities had been destroyed. The insects were in complete panic. Their primitive radio waves filled with screaming and prayers to gods who would not answer. Soon, they would understand. Soon, they would submit, or they would die. Either outcome was acceptable. He was reviewing bombardment reports when his tactical officer made a sound that Thesson had never heard before. It was something between a gasp and a whimper, a noise of pure animal terror. Admiral, the officer said, his voice shaking. Contacts appearing. Unknown signatures. They came from nowhere. Thesson looked at the tactical display. For a moment, his mind refused to process what he was seeing. Ships were appearing in space around his fleet. They had not jumped in from faster-than-light travel. They had not been hiding behind planets or moons. They had simply materialized from empty space, as if reality itself had decided to reveal them. 1 ship became 5. 5 became 10. 10 became 17. Within 60 seconds, the Concordate fleet was surrounded by vessels that should not exist. Impossible, Thesson whispered. Cloaking technology of this sophistication is impossible. We proved it mathematically. We proved it. His tactical officer was still staring at the display. Their weapon signatures. Admiral, I don't recognize any of these systems. Our computers don't recognize them. These ships are human, Thesson finished. He could see the markings now on the lead vessel. Simple text in the human language, a name painted on a hull that bristled with weapons his sensors could not identify. SSV Absolution. A communication request appeared on his console. Thesson accepted it with numb fingers. Captain Yara Chen's face filled the screen. She was younger than Thesson expected. A woman with dark hair and darker eyes. She did not look angry. She looked sad. That was somehow worse. This is the Terran Revenant Fleet to Concordate forces, she said. You will cease bombardment immediately. You will withdraw from this system. You will leave the Vethkai in peace. This is not a negotiation. Thesson stared at her. The shock was fading now, replaced by something more familiar. Contempt. Humanity was a provisional species, tolerated only because they were useful. They had no fleet worth mentioning, no technology that could threaten Concordate vessels. These ships, however impressive they appeared, were surely a bluff. Human vessel, he replied, forcing confidence into his voice. You are outnumbered and outmatched. I have 47 capital ships. You have 17. I suggest you withdraw immediately, or you will be destroyed alongside these insects. Chen did not react to the threat. Her expression did not change. She simply nodded slightly, as if Thesson had confirmed something she already knew. We gave you a chance, she said quietly. Remember that. Remember that. The transmission ended. Thesson opened his mouth to order an attack. But before he could speak, the human ships fired. The Absolution's main weapon was something Concordate science had declared impossible. It was a directed gravitational lance, a beam of focused gravity that could crush matter at a distance. Human scientists had developed it in secret over 80 years. They had tested it in hidden systems that no Concordate survey had ever visited. They had perfected it without anyone knowing it existed. The lance struck Theson's flagship amidships. The effect was instant. The ship's hull crumpled inward like paper being crushed in a fist. Bulkheads collapsed. Reactors ruptured. Theson had one brief moment of absolute incomprehension before the bridge around him folded into itself and ended his 12,000 years of certainty. The flagship's destruction took less than 2 seconds. The Concordat fleet watched in stunned horror as their command ship became a ball of debris and expanding gas. Then the human fleet attacked in earnest. The battle was not a contest. It was an execution. Concordat ships tried to return fire, but their weapons could not lock on to the human vessels. Human point defense systems shot down missiles that should have been too fast to track. Human shields absorbed energy beams that should have overwhelmed any known defense. The Absolution moved through the Concordat formation like a predator among prey. Chen commanded from her bridge with cold precision, calling out targets and coordinating with the other Revenant captains. Her crew worked in focused silence. They had trained for this moment for years. They had imagined it, dreamed of it, feared it. Now it was happening. And they found that they were ready. 3 more kills confirmed, Lieutenant Commander Osei reported. Enemy formation is breaking. They're trying to retreat. Do not let them, Chen ordered. No survivors. No one escapes to warn the others. It was a brutal command, and she knew it. But the Concordat had spent 12,000 years teaching the galaxy that strength was all that mattered. Today, humanity would teach them what strength really looked like. The Concordat captains tried everything. They attempted to coordinate their fire on single human ships. They tried ramming attacks. They launched fighters and bombers that were cut down before they could close the distance. Nothing worked. Human technology was too advanced. Human tactics were too refined. Human crews were too well trained. 11 minutes after the first shot was fired, the last Concordat vessel exploded in a flash of light and debris. Chen stood in the silence that followed. Around her, her crew was breathing hard, still processing what they had just done. 47 enemy ships destroyed. 0 human losses. The most powerful fleet the Concordat had ever assembled, wiped out in the time it took to eat a meal. Captain, Osei said quietly. The Vethkai are still transmitting. They saw the battle. They don't understand what happened, but they know someone saved them. Chen nodded. She walked to a side console and opened a channel to the planet below. She did not know if the Vethkai could understand her words, but she spoke anyway. People of this world, she said. The enemy that came from the sky is gone. We are humans. We come from a world far from here. We mean you no harm. We ask nothing from you. We only came because what was happening here was wrong, and we could not stand by and watch. She paused, searching for words that might transcend the gap between species. You are not alone in the universe. And from this day forward, you are under the protection of humanity. No one will hurt you again. She closed the channel. Whether the Vethkai understood or not, the message would be translated eventually. History would record that humanity's first open act in the galaxy was not conquest, not expansion, not self-interest. It was protection of the weak against the strong, but the real message was not for the Vethkai. It was for the Concordat. It was for every elder race that had spent millennia believing they were untouchable. The humans had been watching. The humans had been building. The humans were done hiding, and the galaxy would never be the same. The news of the Purification Fleet's destruction reached the Chamber of Elders 6 hours after the battle ended. At first, they did not believe it. The reports had to be wrong. Some kind of malfunction. Some kind of mistake. 47 capital ships could not simply vanish. Grand Admiral Theson could not simply be dead. Then the other reports began arriving. Human vessels were decloaking across the galaxy. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. Hidden fleets appeared at every major trade route, every strategic junction, every Concordat military installation. They emerged from the darkness between stars like ghosts stepping out of shadow, revealing themselves all at once in a coordinated display that shattered every assumption the elder races had ever made. The Rithian homeworld woke to find 200 human warships in orbit around their planet. The Valorn shipyards, the largest military construction facility in the galaxy, discovered that a human fleet had been watching them for decades, close enough to destroy them at any moment. The Tessari communication networks, which linked the entire Concordat together, realized that human vessels had been sitting next to every major relay station, undetected, for years. The message was always the same. Human captains broadcast on all frequencies, in every language the elder races spoke. The age of your dominion is over. Humanity is done hiding. From this day forward, the rules have changed. Panic spread through the Concordat like fire through dry grass. Populations that had never known fear discovered what it felt like to be helpless. Governments that had ruled for millennia found themselves unable to protect their own capitals. The psychological damage was almost worse than the military threat. The elder races had built their entire civilization on the belief that they were superior, that they were untouchable. That belief died in a single day. The Chamber of Elders tried to respond. They sent diplomatic messages, offering to negotiate. They offered trade concessions, territorial adjustments, formal recognition of human equality. When humanity did not respond, they tried bribery. They offered technology, resources, access to secrets they had guarded for thousands of years. Humanity remained silent. Growing desperate, the elder races tried threats. They reminded humanity that the Concordat still had millions of ships, billions of soldiers, industrial capacity that dwarfed anything humans could possess. They warned of terrible consequences if humanity did not stand down. The only response was a single transmission from Admiral Okonkwo, broadcast across the galaxy. We have been watching you for 200 years. We know exactly what you have. We know exactly what you can do. And we are not afraid. 6 weeks after the decloaking, the Concordat launched its counterattack. Every remaining military asset was mobilized. Every reserve fleet was activated. Every alliance was called upon. The elder races assembled the largest military force in galactic history. Over 2 million ships, drawn from every corner of their vast territory, all united against the human threat. The offensive lasted 3 days. Human fleets did not meet the Concordat armada in open battle. They did not need to. For 2 centuries, humanity had been mapping every weakness in the Concordat's infrastructure. They knew where the supply depots were. They knew which routes the fleets depended on. They knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage with minimum effort. While the Concordat armada searched for human forces to fight, human ships were destroying fuel stations and ammunition dumps. They were cutting communication lines and collapsing jump gates. They were systematically taking apart the infrastructure that made the Concordat's military machine possible. By the end of the first day, a quarter of the Concordat fleet was stranded without fuel. By the end of the second day, half the remaining ships could not communicate with their commanders. By the end of the third day, the greatest military force ever assembled had become scattered groups of desperate vessels, unable to coordinate, unable to resupply, unable to understand what had gone wrong. Then, the human fleets closed in and finished the job. The destruction was methodical and complete. Human vessels hunted down Concordat ships with patient efficiency. Surrender was accepted. Resistance was ended. Within a week, the Concordat's military capacity was functionally destroyed. 12,000 years of accumulated power. Erased. In days. The economic collapse came next. Human-controlled choke points strangled trade. Without military protection, Concordat merchant vessels refused to travel. Shipments stopped. Prices skyrocketed. Worlds that had depended on interstellar trade for basic necessities began to starve. The political collapse followed. Populations that had been taught for millennia that the elder races were invincible watched human ships patrol their skies. They asked questions that had never been asked before. Why should they obey rulers who could not protect them? Why should they pay taxes to governments that had been proven powerless? Why should they believe anything they had been told? Riots broke out on a dozen worlds. Separatist movements appeared where none had existed before. Species that had been oppressed by the Concordat saw their chance for freedom and took it. The careful structure of 12,000 years began to fall apart. Throughout it all, humanity maintained its silence. Human ships guarded what they had taken. Human commanders refused to negotiate. Human governments issued no demands, made no treaties, offered no terms. They simply watched and waited as the old order died. The galaxy that emerged from the wreckage was not the one the elder races had known. Trade routes were rerouted through human-controlled space. Resources flowed to human markets. Species that had been exploited for generations found themselves under human protection, their oppressors suddenly powerless to harm them. The Concordat had believed that strength was the only thing that mattered. They had built their civilization on that belief, crushing everyone weaker than themselves. Now they discovered what it felt like to be weak. Now they learned what they had taught so many others. And somewhere, in a quiet office on a human world, Admiral Yara Chen read reports of Concordat collapse and felt nothing resembling satisfaction. This was not victory. This was necessity. This was the price of survival in a galaxy that had been built on cruelty. She had not wanted this. No one in the Revenant program had wanted this. They had simply understood, long ago, that one day, they would have no choice. The old galaxy was dying. Something new would have to take its place, and humanity would be there to shape it. 1 year after the decloaking, a delegation from the shattered Concordat was permitted to visit Earth. They came not as rulers, not as negotiators, but as supplicants. Their ships were unarmed. Their guards were symbolic. They had nothing left to threaten with, nothing left to bargain with. They came only to understand. Councillor Miran led the delegation. He was the oldest surviving member of the Rithian ruling council, a being who had lived for 3,000 years and witnessed the rise and fall of countless species. He had once believed himself wise. He had once believed he understood how the galaxy worked. Now he walked through human corridors with the uncertain steps of someone whose entire world had been proven wrong. The Terran Assembly met in a simple building in a human city. No grand hall, no ancient symbols, no displays of power, just a room with chairs and tables where representatives from human worlds gathered to make decisions. The simplicity of it made Miran uncomfortable. The elder races had always surrounded themselves with magnificence. They had believed that appearance was power. Humans seemed not to care. Admiral Yara Chen waited for them at the center of the room. She had been promoted after the Vethkai intervention, elevated to a position she had never sought. She was tired. The past year had demanded everything she had. But she stood straight and met the counselor's eyes as he approached. "Thank you for receiving us," Miran said. His voice was quiet, stripped of the arrogance that had defined his people for millennia. "We have come to offer our surrender, full and unconditional. We have no terms, no conditions, no requests. We ask only for mercy." Chen studied him for a long moment. She had spent years watching the Rithians from the shadows. She had seen Miran vote for the extermination of entire species with casual indifference. She had recorded him laughing at the suffering of those weaker than himself. Now he stood before her, humbled, broken, asking for the mercy he had never shown others. "Sit down, counselor," she said finally. "You came here for understanding. I will give you what I can." Miran sat. His delegation arranged themselves behind him, nervous and silent. They had expected demands, threats, punishment. This calm reception frightened them more than anger would have. "You have questions," Chen said. "Ask them." Miran gathered himself. The question had been burning in him for a year. In all of them, ever since the moment human ships had appeared from nothing and destroyed everything they had built. Why? He asked. You could have revealed yourselves at any time. When your cloaking technology was perfected, you could have demanded equality. You could have shown us your strength and negotiated from a position of power. We might have accepted you as partners. We might have shared the galaxy with you. His voice cracked slightly. Why did you wait? Why did you hide? Why did you watch us for 2 centuries without saying anything? Chen was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft, almost gentle. Because we knew what you were, she said. From the very beginning, we knew. We watched how you treated every species weaker than yourselves. We saw the exploitation, the oppression, the quiet extinctions that you called natural selection. We saw how you smiled at younger species while stealing everything they had. We saw how you crushed anyone who threatened your dominance. She leaned forward slightly. And we knew that the moment you saw us as a threat, you would try to destroy us. You would smile and sign treaties and promise friendship, and then you would find ways to weaken us, to control us, to eliminate us before we could challenge your power. That is what you have always done. That is what you would have done to us. Miran wanted to deny it. He wanted to claim that the Concordat would have been reasonable, that accommodation was possible. But he could not. He had been there when the chamber discussed humanity. He remembered the conversations about keeping the humans contained, keeping them weak, making sure they never developed enough to become a problem. So we hid? Chen continued. We let you believe the lie you wanted to believe. We built our strength in the darkness, where you could not see us, where you could not stop us. And we waited. Waited for what? Miran asked. For you to show us who you truly were. For you to prove, beyond any possible doubt, that you would never change. That your cruelty was not accident or ignorance, but choice. 200 years to treat one species, any species, with genuine kindness. 200 years to show us that the Concordat was capable of being something other than predators, wearing the mask of civilization. She paused. The Vethkai were your answer. An innocent species. No threat to anyone, possessing something you wanted. And your response was genocide. Not war, not conquest, but extermination. You were going to wipe them out and take their world and feel nothing about it at all. We would have, Miran began, but Chen cut him off. You would have murdered millions of thinking beings because they were inconvenient. You were already murdering them when we intervened. We watched the first cities burn. Her voice was still calm, but there was something terrible beneath it. That was the answer, counselor. That was who you truly were. And that was when we knew that we could not wait any longer. Silence filled the room. The Concordat delegation sat frozen, unable to meet Chen's gaze. Everything she said was true. They had known it was true, even as they did it. They had simply never expected to be held accountable. Miran spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. What happens now? To us? To our people? To everyone who served the Concordat? Chen zot back. The hardness in her eyes softened slightly. We are not you, she said. We did not destroy the Concordat to take its place. We destroyed it because it could not be allowed to continue. The galaxy you built was a machine for turning weakness into suffering. We could not change it from inside. We had to tear it down. Dot? She gestured at the simple room around them. What comes next is something new. A galaxy where strength does not mean the right to dominate. Where species are protected, not exploited. Where the powerful are judged by how they treat the powerless, not by how much they can take. You will rule, Miran said. It was not a question. We will guard, Chen corrected. For now, until something better can be built. We do not want an empire, counselor. We want a galaxy where empires are no longer necessary. She stood, signaling that the audience was nearing its end. Go back to your people. Tell them that humanity does not seek revenge. Tell them that the killing is over, that the punishment is not destruction but change. They will have to live differently now. They will have to treat others as equals. That is what the Concordat bought with 12,000 years of cruelty. Miran rose slowly. He felt ancient in a way he never had before. 3,000 years of certainty. Gone. Everything he had believed about the galaxy. Wrong. One more question, he said. If we had been different, if we had treated humanity with genuine respect from the beginning, if we had welcomed you as true partners, would any of this have happened? Chen considered the question for a long moment before answering. We would have been your friends, she said quietly. We would have been your greatest allies. We would have given you everything we had and asked nothing in return but fairness. She shook her head slowly. You could have had partners. Instead, you chose to have subjects. And now, you have neither. She turned away, dismissing the delegation with a gesture. Welcome to humanity's galaxy, Counselor. The rules have changed. I suggest you learn them quickly. Num. The Concordat representatives left in silence. Behind them, the human assembly resumed its work, planning the future of a galaxy that would never again belong to those who believed that power was its own justification. Outside, stars burned in the eternal darkness. And somewhere among them, the Vethkai were rebuilding their cities, watched over by human ships that asked nothing in return. The galaxy had changed, and for the first time in 12,000 years, it had changed for the better.